There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Schaff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
This is What in the World is Going On, and I'm your host, Richard Schaff. The program is sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. We are pro-Christian, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, pro-American, and here only by the grace of God. Once again today, I'm going to talk about just one subject, and those things that relate to it, Afghanistan. First, a few personal comments from me. I do not trust the White House National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, and I don't trust anything that he speaks about. I do not trust his word. I do not trust U.S. Secretary of State Blinken or anything he says or does. And I do not believe in the principles or policies that Press Secretary Circleback Jan Psaki speaks of or espouses. I want to note that the 13 U.S. troops killed Thursday, Wednesday, August 26th, are more than either of the past 2 years. Yeah, we didn't lose 13 a year for the past 2 years. We lost 13 as of today in one day. We are being told by the administration, and it's probably true, that the next 2 days are the most dangerous of the entire Afghan mission. And most likely there'll be an attack today, Sunday, August 29th, as I'm recording this, even though the day is over half gone, according to the White House. I want to make note that the enemy, the Afghans, have the names and addresses of U.S. citizens that are still in Afghanistan, as well as those of the Afghans who supported us. They know where they're at. Want to guess what their fate will be? I feel there's a bad future for Afghanistan, both for the freedom lovers there, the children, the women, any efforts we have, or any troops that we might put there. Why? The Bagram Air Base has been abandoned. Our drones are being removed from the country. Some will be flying in now from halfway around the world. Our U.S. embassy is about to close. All U.S. troops are supposed to be out. The Afghan support citizens, those that supported our men, have been abandoned. And we still have U.S. citizens remaining in the country. What does it look like for you? Let's look back a few years. In March 1968, President Lyndon Johnson announced to a shocked nation that he would not seek re-election. The nation was reeling from Vietnam, a tumultuous year of protests, and an overwhelming feeling of discontent. This reached down into the heart and soul of America. A veteran of the U.S. Senate and foreign policy, expert in his own right, LBJ sensed that he had lost the country, and he did the honorable thing of opting not to run again. That was provided to me from the Washington Examiner. Continuing, one cannot help but see the comparisons when we look back at President Joe Biden in his first 8 months in office. His handling of the Afghanistan withdrawal is the latest in a series of major setbacks that have resulted in a destitute America. The administration has failed to address the crisis at our southern border. They've crushed America's energy independence, making our nation less safe and ill-prepared for the future. Further, the reckless spending occurred since Biden entered his office has led to inflationary spikes affecting everything from gasoline to school supply and groceries. Finally, the visuals of Afghans clinging for life and then falling from airplanes as America abandoned our people and those who helped us. This will haunt our nation's history for decades, if not lifetimes. The sad reality is that the Biden disastrous decisions have caused the American people to lose faith and confidence in him, and for the good of the nation, he should resign. In just 11 days, Biden effectively surrendered Afghanistan to the Taliban, stranded countless Americans and Afghan allies outside of potential safe zones, and crushed over 2 decades of humanitarian work advancing women and children. Biden is the face of the catastrophe, as his cabinet continues to botch the aftermath of his unplanned and disastrous execution. We've gone from American stability to the Taliban calling the shots. And fellow patriots, this is unacceptable. While Biden has long considered himself a foreign policy expert, Robert Gates, the former defense secretary under President Barack Obama, claimed that Biden has been, quote, wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades. End quote from Robert Gates. The incompetency surrounding the Afghanistan withdrawal, including the abandonment of Bagram Air Base and the removal of our military forces before U.S. citizens and Afghan interpreters, coupled with a gross dereliction of duty, raises serious questions about the president's knowledge and involvement in White House decision-making. What do you think? Is Biden solely responsible for America's worst foreign policy in a generation or longer? Or has he relinquished the decision-making powers to unelected bureaucrats who are running the nation in his stead? I'm not sure which answer is more concerning, and I'm certain this is not what Americans voted for. Last week, a little girl was trampled to death between a mob of people, those trying to flee Afghanistan. She was the daughter of an Afghan interpreter who became separated from his daughter amid the chaos. This story and the visuals that accompanied it signified the lowest point in what has been America's darkest weeks in this century. The fear is that chaos has just begun and could get worse. Biden has become the portrait of this chaos, and his standing in America and the world is forever diminished. It is time that he realizes this and acknowledges that America's recovery, both domestically and across the globe, begins with his resignation as president. It would be the right thing to do. The above came to me from Vicki Hartzler, representing Missouri's 4th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. Afghan, what is it? What are the Afghans going to do? Biden's Benghazi. Muslim feelings were more important than American lives. Daniel Green, who sent this out this past week, is a showman journalism fellow with the Freedom Center and an investigative journalist and writer focusing on the radical left and Islamic terrorism. I'm quoting him here. More American soldiers died in 1 week of Biden's retreat than in the last 2 years of war. 14 American soldiers had died in... 19 American soldiers had died in combat in Afghan from August 2019 until now. Then, over a dozen of our men were murdered in one single day during Biden's most shameful retreat. Like so many of the American soldiers who were killed by the Taliban and their al-Qaeda allies during the Obama-Biden administration, and like the Americans murdered on Benghazi by jihadists allied with al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood, they didn't have to die. American soldiers died because they were prevented from defending themselves. Abandoning thousands of Americans behind enemy lines, the Biden administration turned the Kabul airport into Fort Apache, surrounded by the Taliban, al-Qaeda, and other jihadists. Taliban jihadists control the checkpoints, check papers, beat Americans, and entered the airport to what? Coordinate security with American forces. Thousands of American citizens and soldiers were cut off from each other, able to meet only with the approval of the Taliban. We use the Taliban as a tool to protect us as much as possible. That's a quote from Marine Corps General Frank McKenzie. He was bragging about it. McKenzie had repeatedly described the Taliban as partners. What a disgrace this man is to the Marine Corps. As warnings of an imminent ISIS-K attack grew, the Biden administration continued to rely on the Taliban to keep their fellow terrorists in check. This was the same treasonous mistake that led to the murder of Americans in Benghazi at the hands of an Islamic militia that was being paid to protect them from other jihadists. It was also how the British lost thousands of soldiers during their disastrous retreat from Kabul way back in 1842. You heard me right, 1842. But Biden, Austin, and Milley remained blind to both recent and classical histories about the perils of insisting the lives of your men, trusting them to the enemy. Even now, with so many American soldiers dead, the Biden administration and its generals can only think of closer security cooperation with the Taliban, showing that they've learned nothing. When Biden abandoned Bagram Air Force Base, he not only threw away the best and most secure means for evacuating Americans, he also handed over thousands of terrorists in prison from their prisons at the base. These included Al-Qaeda and ISIS-K terrorists. There were thousands of prisoners released. It would not be surprising if the perpetrators or organizers of the Kabul airport attack turned out to have been imprisoned there themselves. The Biden administration and its cronies keep promising that the Taliban will fight ISIS-K. Taliban units have gone back and forth from ISIS-K in much the way our good jihadists in Syria went back and forth between the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS. When the Biden administration coordinates with the Taliban, there's no way to know if it's coordinating with the factions of the Taliban potentially sympathetic to ISIS-K. But there's no question that it's coordinating with Al-Qaeda. Exclusive report here from Donald Trump. Boy, I'm glad to hear him speak out on the subject. He notes that Biden's Afghanistan failure is, quote, single most embarrassing moment in the history of our country. A quote from former President Donald Trump. Got this from Brandon Bell, Getty Images. Up in Bedminster, New Jersey, Donald Trump told Breitbart News exclusively that his successor, President Joe Biden, botched withdrawal from Afghanistan as the, quote, single most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, end quote. Trump's comments came in a lengthy and wide-ranging, nearly 2-hour-long exclusive interview on Wednesday, August 25th, from his office at his golf club in northern New Jersey. The interview, which took place before Thursday morning's horrific terrorist attack in Kabul at the international airport, an attack that we've talked about claimed the lives of 13 American service members and many Afghans, as well as injuring many, many more. And moments after senior Biden administration officials attempted to downplay the number of American citizens still stranded in Afghanistan, more than a week after the Taliban swept back into control across their country. Well, the only thing that surprised me, Trump said, is that everybody knew how absolutely stupid the situation in Afghanistan was, that it should have never been done this way. A quote from Donald Trump. Continuing to quote him, because everybody knows, a child would know that you take the military out last. You get everybody out, then you get all the equipment. You take your $83 billion worth of equipment, and then you blow up the base. Perhaps you take a certain area that you want to keep, an area such as Bagram, and you keep the base because it's next to China and Iran. It cost billions and billions of dollars to build. And maybe you keep that for other reasons. But everybody knows that you take the military out last. And they took the military out first. A quarter. Wow. Our former president, Donald Trump, and those were his words. Don't you wish he was in the White House today? White House leader Kevin McCarthy ripped the Biden administration's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan during his weekly press briefing last Wednesday. He said, and I quote, Biden went against everything America has stood for in the past. We just had a president go against everything America has stood for. He noted, he made a decision and he won't answer questions. End quote. From Kevin McCarthy. Republican Congressman Dan Crenshaw also slammed Biden's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan on Fox News. That was last Tuesday. He noted, and I'm quoting him, our commander-in-chief is building the Taliban back better, not America. Every time you think of something you shouldn't do, that's exactly what he does. He's building the Taliban back much better. That's exactly what he's done. Again, he's not building America back better. It's the Taliban. End quote. I never thought I'd see the American military, our country, acting this way. We don't run from these people. We make our own timelines, and those timelines should be based on getting our people out in a timely fashion. When it's over when we say it is. If they don't like that, that's too bad. That's when we kill them. Again, quoting the good congressman. I mentioned last week that the effect that Biden was having on our allies, and a follow-up to that, it's affecting France, the UK, Italy, Germany. What are they doing? They're turning to Putin and Russia for assistance in Afghanistan. As Joe Biden continues to falter, Germany and now the UK have reached out to Vladimir Putin to thwart further chaos in Afghanistan. French and Italian leaders reached out to Putin last week to discuss humanitarian issues in Afghanistan. The entire Western world knows they cannot trust the Biden regime after this historic catastrophe, this one that they engineered in Afghanistan. Britain will this week turn to China and Russia to try and stop Afghanistan sliding further into chaos. This after recriminations between London and Washington over U.S. President Joe Biden's withdrawal of American troops. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government is also working closely with France, and they've had strained relations over England's exit from Brexit. They're now working together to try to engineer a U.S. response to the crisis in Afghanistan. Between Johnson and Biden, but the British Prime Minister's foreign policy heavily dependent on the U.S. It's now been shaken by the crisis and has forced London to court other capitals. Just a sampling of what's going on with other countries as an aftermath to the Biden policy in Afghanistan. They got a couple of good veterans in the elected to the House from Florida. One of them is Representative Mast, M-A-S-T. He notes that Biden's words are as hollow as Biden's heart and his head. President Joe Biden vowed retribution on the ISIS-K terrorists behind the suicidal bombings in Kabul last Thursday. But Representative Brian Mast, Republican of Florida, said he does not, quote, believe a single word that comes out of that man's mouth, end quote. I've got a lot of rage going through me, and truly against this president. A quote from Congressman Mast. He said this on CNN's The Situation Room. Mast, a U.S. veteran of the Afghan war, has lost both his legs in an IED, that's an improvised explosive device. It hit him when he was over there. Lost both legs. He noted he recently shed tears for the more than a dozen U.S. service members who were killed last Thursday by a pair of suicide bombers outside the Kabul airport. Biden vowed to the terrorist masterminds of ISIS-K, saying, we will hunt you down and make you pay. But Mast has left uninspired by these hollow words. It's hollow, Mast told CNN. His words were as hollow as his heart and his head. That's the truth of it. All of this goes back to the missteps from the very beginning. You look at everything that's going on here. There's been messaging for the last week, the exact opposite of what's going on in our world. Mast rebuked Biden for having capitulated to the Taliban demands, those demands to complete the withdrawal by the August 31st deadline, saying the president was intimidated by our enemy. He said he wasn't going to be intimidated, Mast said. Well, this happened precisely because he was intimidated. Every step he's taken has because he was intimidated along the way. He's been worried about the optics all along the path. These are words from Mast, who admitted he's frustrated, sad, angry, and unwilling to listen to anything from Biden. Another Republican speaks out, another one from Florida, by the way. Senator Mike Waltz, you've probably seen him on Fox News. He's been on quite a bit recently. He mentioned on Newsmax, quote, Biden needs to show some spine. President Joe Biden has been exposed for his lack of leadership or spine, and now must order the Taliban to stand down. This as we evacuate U.S. citizens and allies from Afghanistan. It is a quote from Representative Michael Waltz, Republican of Florida, and stated on Newsmax. At the end of the day, the mission is not complete unless we bring every American home and not some made-up date out of Joe Biden's head. A quote from Congressman Waltz Thursday on Eric Belling, The Balance. So Biden, by procrastinating his lack of leadership, his lack of clarity, has us in this unwinnable situation. If he would just show some spine, he could get us out. He could get us out if he would do something besides what he is doing now. Among the steps to take, Bagram Air Base and Taliban, quote, we're coming to get our citizens. If you stand in our way, we're going to kill you. A quote from Waltz. He was the first Green Beret elected to Congress and an Iraq War veteran. He made these words to his guest host, Carl Higbee, a former Navy SEALs. These are men with a spine, looking for one in our president. Kabul International Airport is not defendable, Waltz pointed out. We need to retake Bagram. You tell the Taliban we're going to get our citizens, or else we're going to unleash our special forces to do it. By the way, the U.S. Special Forces, they're waiting right now for that order, but they're not getting it from the White House. More from Representative Crenshaw. He warns of ISIS attacks could be coming to the U.S. sooner rather than later. Dan Crenshaw, Republican of Texas, on Thursday, warned that ISIS attacks will ultimately be coming sooner or later to the United States because the war on terror has clearly not ended following the suicide bombing in Kabul earlier in the day. Incidentally, remember back 20 years ago why the war was started? Because of 9/11. It came largely from efforts from Afghanistan. Crenshaw continued, and I'm quoting him from reporting on Fox News, their capabilities are obviously still intact. I'm not sure if this attack is a result of the fact that when the Taliban came through, they let 5,000 prisoners out. Many of them were from ISIS. In any case, the intelligence community saw this coming, and now they assume that whether it's Al-Qaeda or ISIS, they'll be able to externalize these attacks, meaning to do it on the homeland, sooner or later. Terrorist group ISIS-K has claimed responsibility for the attack, which killed at least 13, up to this date, 13 U.S. service members and many more civilians. That's a warning of a repeat for what we recently had. just a few years ago. It didn't take long for Biden to screw things up in Afghanistan. Got a report from Silvio Canto. As you remember, former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates once said that Joe Biden has been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades. Let's add Afghanistan to that list. How in the world did you get this withdrawal from Afghanistan so wrong? The simple answer is President Biden. Nick Aremo wrote, "Was it inevitable that it would end up this way? Having this happen in this disastrous, humiliating way was not inevitable. That's completely all on Joe Biden, the guy who's been wrong about everything for the past 40 years. Early in July, when Joe Biden still had the opportunity to do things, but was sitting on his hands, acting as though he had all the time in the world, he claimed it wasn't inevitable that the Taliban would take over again, despite the fact that the U.S. intelligence was predicting that it would happen. There's going to be no circumstances where you'll see people being lifted out of the roof of an embassy of the United States from Afghanistan. Joe Biden, he replied to that when asked about the possibility of an airlift, as happened in 1975 during the fall of Saigon at the end of the Vietnam War. Biden needs to turn on the TV because a lot of our friends are desperately trying to get out, just like Saigon in 1975. But you see, at least there was a helicopter on the roof in Saigon. Who knows what happens now that the Taliban are close enough to touch the embassy and has enough U.S. missiles to shoot down an aircraft? It didn't take long for the apologists to blame Donald Trump or even President Bush. You know, that's the pathetic, and I'm quoting him, "I inherited this from my predecessor" excuse. As for President Bush, he opposed the withdrawal in July. And for President Trump, he wanted out, but it was conditional. We've talked on that. This one is on Biden, 100%, and all of those smart people around him. Maybe they've been too focused on climate change, or critical race theory, or white supremacists. Well, he also inherited cheap gas, an orderly U.S.-Mexico border, and we know how time is running out there. Well, how about those smug never-Trumpers? Do you think they're happy now? Do you? There was a predictable silence from the vast majority of my Democrat friends on the utter incompetency of the Biden administration. This, a report from Josh Cantrell. These are the same people who spent 4 years obsessively posting and tweeting that the very existence of the republic was at stake every time Trump issued a, quote, mean tweet. While the Afghan fiasco of dominating the news, the administration blunders extend to a number of other spheres. The southern border, which is basically open to anyone. Inflation skyrocketing at rates we haven't seen for decades. Out-of-control spending, record-high crime in cities thoroughly run by Democrats. Bad actors like China and Iran taking advantage of this administration's weakness, etc., etc. You know, Biden makes Jimmy Carter look good. I'm genuinely sad for our country. The terrorist attacks are beyond tragic, but sadly predictable. That's what happens when 44,000 or so voters in Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin impose their preference for, quote, personality over policy, when they lay that on our nation. I sure hope the smug never-Trumpers, suburban moms, and moderates who voted for Biden are now happy. Because of them, instead of having a highly competent and a successful administration that brought this country unprecedented peace and prosperity, albeit headed by a sometimes crude president, we are now left with a bumbling, incompetent idiot. Those are the words of Josh Cantrell. Some of my followers, he noted on social media, have asked if I favor impeachment. The answer is a responding no, because Kamala Harris would be even worse. So much worse. Give Biden credit for one thing. He knew what he was doing when he selected her. He bought an inexpensive but effective insurance policy against impeachment and the 25th Amendment. In closing, I want to share with you an article I've shared once before. I seldom do this, but I think it's so appropriate, at least at this particular time. The sun is telling the sad truth. Never better said. Time is like a river. You cannot touch the water twice because the flow that has passed will never pass again. Those are the words of Reverend Franklin Graham. He was speaking at the First Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Florida, when he said America will not come back. He wrote, and I quote, "The American dream has ended. The first term of Joe Biden has been the final nail in the coffin for the legacy of the white Christian males who discovered, explored, pioneered, settled, and developed the greatest republic in the history of mankind. A coalition of blacks, feminists, gays, government workers, union members, environmental extremists, the media, Hollywood, uninformed young people, the forever needy, the chronically unemployed that do not want to work, illegal aliens, and other fellow travelers have ended Norman Rockwell's America. You'll never again outvote these people. It will take individual acts of defiance and massive displays of civil disobedience to get back the rights we've allowed them to take away. It'll take zealots, not moderates. Not moderates and shy, not reach across aisle rhinos. We have to ship and restore our country. Right this ship to its former status. People like me, noted Graham, are completely political irrelevant, and I'll probably never again legally comment on or concern myself with the aforementioned coalition, which has surrendered our culture, our heritage, and our traditions without a single shot being fired. The Cocker Spaniel is off the front porch. The Pit Bull is in the backyard. And the American Constitution has been replaced with Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, and the likes of Chicago shyster David Axelrod, along with international socialist George Soros, who have been pulling the strings on their beige puppet and have bought us Act 2 of the New World Order. The curtain will come down, but the damage will have been done. The story has been told. Those who come after us will once again have to risk their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor to bring back the republic that this generation has timidly frittered away due to white guilt and political correctness. I close with this. In God we trust.